Right, good afternoon everybody. Welcome to the Planning Committee of Bath and North East Somerset Council, being held on Wednesday the 17th of January 2024 in the Council Chamber at the Guildhall. I'd like to welcome everybody and to introduce myself. I'm Councillor Duncan Hansell. I'm Chair of the Planning Committee, and I will now ask the officers on the top table to introduce themselves.
Hello, I'm Karina Haskins from Democratic Services.
Hello, I'm Sarah James. I'm the Deputy Head of Planning Development Management.
Simon Elias, Senior Lawyer in the Place Legal Team.
Thank you very much. Can I remind everyone to switch their phones, iPads and laptops to silent during the meeting. The meeting is being filmed and the recording will be available on the Council's website. Anybody speaking that does not wish to be filmed should make themselves known to the camera operator in the corner. Can I just say that we're not normally in the Council chamber, we're usually in another room. This room isn't ideal for this committee. Acoustics aren't great, but we'll manage. There will be times when the councillors will need to move so that they can actually see the screen, but then we'll all come back together. So hopefully that won't disturb proceedings too much. The next item, I've just asked the Democratic Services Officer to explain the emergency evacuation procedure.
Thank you, Chair. If a continuous alarm sounds, you must evacuate the building and proceed to the assembly point. From this room, you follow the illuminated green light using either the marble staircase at the end of the building nearest to Bath Abbey or the main staircase. Please do not use the lifts. The assembly point for this building is in Orange Grove on the green outside Browns.
Thank you. Do we have any apologies for absence and substitutions? Thank you very much. We don't have Councillor Crossley here this afternoon. Thank you. Declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest? Thank you. None declared. Urgent business agreed by the Chair. I do not have any urgent business. Items from the public, statements and questions. Democratic Services Officer will now inform us of the public speaking procedure.
Thank you. Speakers will be called immediately after the case officer has made their presentation about the application. The order of speakers and the time allowed for speaking will be as follows. It would be Parish and Town Council representatives first, we don't have any today. Next is objectors to an application, who will be allowed 3 minutes. Supporters of an application will be allowed 3 minutes. Ward councillors not on the committee who have indicated they wish to speak may do so for a maximum of 5 minutes. Speeches will be timed by the traffic light system you can see on the table next to me. At the start, the light will be green and will turn to amber when there is 1 minute of speaking time remaining. When the light turns red, speakers should immediately conclude their remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The minutes of the previous meeting held on the 13th of December, they've been circulated. Are these approved as a correct record? Thank you, Councillor Jackson, and seconded by Councillor Simon. Right, we now move on. Now, in the agenda it says the site visit list and then the first item, 1 Drake Avenue. If I could just ask for understanding that we're actually going to do the second item first because it's a very, very straightforward application to do with a tray. It's only here because the applicant is a councillor. So we need to do it openly. But the decision we should be making a decision very briefly, very quickly. So if you can just bear with us, we'll do this one first, and then the tree officer can go away and carry on with other important business as well. So we're going to take item on the mains plans list, which is 23/04679/TCA, Sydney House, Sydney Road, and invite the case officer, Jane Brewer, to present her report. Just pause for a moment because people might want to relocate so that we can actually see the presentation. I'll be moving as for sure. So let's just take a moment and I will move.
Thank you, Chair. This item has been brought to this committee because it relates to a councillor's tree, and as you can see from the proposal, it's very minor, relating to the removal of an ivy-clad stem and reduction of overhanging branches over a footpath. This is the site location plan. It's Sydney House on the junction of Sydney Road and Beckford Road. This is the location of the tree. As you can see, it's right by the front boundary wall. And this is actually the stem to be reduced, and there's a second stem behind the wall which is to be removed. As you can see, it overhangs quite significantly at quite an alarming angle. The work is considered to be very reasonable and normal management of a tree in a domestic garden, and I'm recommending that no objection is raised to the works. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Any questions to, well, we don't have any public speakers on this item. Questions to the case officer, do we have any? No questions. Right, we move to the debate. Would anybody like to make a proposal? Yes, please.
This is my ward. I can see no reason not to accept the officer's recommendation, so I move acceptance of the officer's report.
Thank you. And seconded by Councillor Warren?
Yeah, happy to second.
Thank you. Anybody want to contribute? Councillor Halsall?
Thank you. It's sound arboricultural practice to take care of the tree, and removal of that stem will obviously reduce any risk of it falling onto the public highway.
Thank you very much. Right, we'll move to the vote. All those in favour of the officer recommendation to permit, please show. Any against? Any abstentions? So that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm glad my prediction of it being brief was correct. Thank you. Thank you for your patience waiting for 1 Drake Avenue. So this is case 23/02731/FUL, 1 Drake Avenue, Coombe Down. Just before I ask the case officer to present the report, can I ask the Chief Planning Officer here to just explain the difference between this application and what came to us at a previous committee? Would that be okay?
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't at the previous committee with this application. However, there was some debate around the lawful use of the property as it exists and the operations that are currently being carried out in that property. So the officers, the application was deferred, the site visit was carried out, and officers did some further investigations into both of those matters, enabling us to bring the application back before you with some clarity on both of those matters, and the case officer will run through that with you as he does his presentation.
Thank you very much. Right, I now invite the case officer to present. Again, just pause for a moment as one or two of us relocate so we can see the screen. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. As explained by Sarah, the main difference between this application that's before members today and the application that previously came to committee in November is that previously the application was understood to be retrospective. Having looked into the situation of the existing property in quite a lot of detail and with legal advice, our understanding is now that the application is not retrospective, and therefore the application before members is for the change of use from the dwelling use class C3 to house in multiple occupation, which is C4. It's worth saying that the reason why planning permission is required is because there's an Article 4 direction which covers Bath. Ordinarily, this development would be permitted development under the General Permitted Development Order. So this is a site location plan which shows the site within its context. One Drake Avenue is a two-storey end of terrace property. Members will be familiar with it from the site visit. So the application seeks permission for a 5-bed HMO. This falls within the C4 use class. The property has been assessed against relevant policies, including the Council's policy on HMOs, H2, which encourages assessment of the application against tests, including the sandwich test. In this instance, the property does not sandwich a residential property, as well as the density test. In this instance, the density of HMOs in the 100-metre radius is 3.65%, so well beneath the 10% threshold ordinarily considered acceptable. All of the bedrooms and living spaces accord with the sizes, the minimum standards of accommodation set out in the HMO SPD. So it's considered that occupiers have a good standard of accommodation. All rooms are served by good-sized windows, so that all habitable spaces have a good degree of natural light. There's a rear garden and storage for bicycles. So this shows just the property a bit closer up, showing the location of the bike storage and the bin storage that's at the property. So on the basis that the proposal accords with policy H2 as well as other policies relating to residential amenity, there's no external changes proposed. It's the officer's recommendation is to grant permission for the reasons set out in the report.
Thank you very much. We now move on to statements from public speakers. We have two speakers. First of all, if I can ask Jeff Manning to come forward. If you could just sit there, that would be great. And you are objecting to the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. You don't see a green light. How's that? Now I see a green light. Thank you. What I was going to say was much more than I would have said if I hadn't heard that Julian House are leaving 1 Drake Avenue. Now, you may not know that, maybe you do. It's been a very serious matter for the local residents. There's been a lot of anger. It's strange that in the early days, when there was nearly 100 objections, very little reference was made to that by the officer. It came out that the Environmental Health Service, or Environmental Services, had issued an HMO license. And that's when we learned that there are two ways of getting an HMO. You can talk in planning, you can talk in environment. What that tells me is that the HMO status that was given in 21 was virtually by stealth. Nobody knew about it. I mean, we are told, now I'm jumping to the now, in the officer's report, he says that on the 5th of January, consultations were sent out to all the appropriate people. I can tell you that nobody I know, including the man who lives next door to number 1, has received anything whatsoever in any form from the council advising on that. So my main message is, this is happening by stealth. They've got an HMO status from the Environment Department. Now we're sort of, if you like, regularising through the planning process. And what would happen if all the 3-bedroom houses in Fox Hill just quietly put the bedrooms in and just packed a few people in, just as happened here, and then later on asked for planning permission? It would be chaos. More family homes would be lost. This is the loss of an ordinary 3-bedroom house. There is no potential to expand it sideways, as there is in many other cases. I've observed, I live nearer to this house than most of the people in Drake Avenue, by the way. I've observed the chaos of the last couple of years, and I understand the anxiety of the people who live around the property. Now, that threat is going away. I understand that. But I don't think that's a very good reason to allow this private owner to just further his interests and make as much profit as possible from what is really just an ordinary family home. So I hope you will ask the planning officer why there were no notifications received by anyone that I know in my area. And I hope you will, I don't know what you found when you went up there. I'm sorry, thanks for all going up in the pouring rain. I watched it from my bathroom window. I know people like to be kept out of the way at the time. I hope you'll be minded to refuse it and make an example of it, frankly. That's really all I want to say.
Thank you very much.
I see your red light. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Councillor Onkar Saini, the local ward member.
Thank you. Dear committee members, as the local councillor for Coombe Down Ward, I urge your careful consideration and subsequent rejection of the planning application for 1 the Drake Avenue. This matter is of utmost importance due to several pressing concerns being raised and recorded on application by the residents in Fox Hill that not only impact the prospective occupants but also pose significant risk to the well-being and safety of the broader community. The alterations to this property represent an inappropriate intensification and exceed the reasonable limits for residential use. This raises serious questions about the impact on the neighborhood's character and the potential compromise of the quality of life for nearby residents. The character of our community is a delicate balance that requires preservation, and approving such changes may set a precedent for further deviations that could irreversibly alter the fabric of this neighborhood. Furthermore, envision the property being rented out to multiple individuals, each with a vehicle, raises serious questions about the street's capacity to accommodate such an influx of cars. The lack of provision for additional parking spaces could increase congestion, posing potential hazards for the community and its residents. In conclusion, I implore the committee to prioritize our community well-being, safety, and cohesion by rejecting the planning application for 1 the Drake Avenue. The changes exceed permissible residential limits and introduce significant safety and traffic concerns that should be noted. Your decision will reflect a commitment to preserving this neighborhood's unique character and ensuring its residents' security and prosperity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. That ends the number of speakers on this item. So we now move on to questions to the case officer. So who would like to go first? Councillor Jackson.
It's partly a question to the case officer and... Sorry, I switched the wrong one. It's partly a question to the case officer and partly a question to the legal officer. Can the case officer demonstrate that notification was sent out, because there have been other cases where even the other half of a semi-detached house has not received any notice and there's not been anything outside? So that's the first question. And secondly, for the legal people, if no notification was sent out, what are the implications of it for the process today and a possible complaint?
I'm happy to jump in on that one. So in terms of consultations, we did send out those consultations to the amended description. We did receive a number of comments following that consultation period. That should be shown by the uplift in numbers of responses received between the November committee and the update report which was sent out. I can, if you want to give me a few minutes, find the records on our system to demonstrate that.
Right, the Chief Planning Officers will add to your comment.
I was just going to add to say the way in which an application is advertised and notified is set out in the Development Management Procedure Order. I understand that the case officer has already checked to make sure that the notifications that we've carried out does comply with that order. We will have records as a council within our systems as to who was notified and how the notifications took place. So if you would like the case officer to look those up, it is possible, but my understanding is that the case officer has already checked that because it's a matter that's previously been raised. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I've had a look at which responses have been received following that reconsultation and added those to the update report. So I'm very confident that consultation was undertaken with relevant parties, specifically people who made representations previously. Ordinarily, our initial consults to neighbours goes out in the post. But where people respond by the web form on the website and provide us with an email address, those later consultations would be sent to them by email. So I have good confidence that they would have been received.
Okay. Thank you very much. Right, that's addressed that point. Next question, Councillor Jackson.
If we could be reminded of the exact location, because I went on the site visit, but we did so many left and right turns that I sort of lost my sense of direction.
I've just pulled that up on the slide for you.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I get it now.
In the supplementary report, it refers to the existing use as being sui generis, but in the main report it refers to class C3C, which is, as I understand it, the supported accommodation class. So can we just be clear which class it's currently, the current use, lawful use is, and to confirm that the move to class C4 will mean that it can be used as general needs HMO accommodation?
Yeah, so that's a good question. There has been some confusion on this point, and it is the point which has led to the change of description. So officers have looked into what the present use of the property is in conjunction with legal officers. Our view is that the present use of the property, which commenced in 2021, is as sui generis. The existing lawful use, because that property, although being used in that use for the period since 2021, hasn't reached the immunity period for enforcement action, our view is that the existing lawful use is as C3. So C4 is the general HMO use.
Yes, I appreciate that. But as I understood it, supported accommodation is a permitted is permitted development from a permitted change of use from Class C3. Is that correct? So it's not it's not enforceable against in the current Julian House use.
So Class C3 encompasses a number of subclasses, one of which is C3C. Our view is that the existing manner of use, the present use, doesn't fall within C3.
Thank you. And just to clarify that means that the current use could be subject to a planning enforcement case. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yes.
Thank you. I just want to clarify a little bit further. So what you have before you today is an application to change the use from a C3 use class to a C4 use class. And that is the consideration that you need to give to what is before you. In terms of what is actually taking place within that building, having been on site and looked into it, we considered that it may well be the case that it is a sui generis use that is currently operating, and therefore if this application were permitted today, it may well not fall within the use that you are permitting, or if that's what you decide to do. In terms of how we would then proceed, is we would then have to go back to the applicant and consider what next steps might be taken with regards to how they may regularise the use, and that may include consideration of whether we should consider enforcement action. However, that is another stage to the process, and I think it's important that members today just focus on the application before them, which is to change the use from a C3 use class to a C4 use class.
Thank you. More questions? Councillor Hughes.
Thank you. Hopefully you can hear me. I'm using Eleanor's microphone. So just a couple of things. So the property management plan has been removed, and I'm assuming that's because Julian House are no longer involved in this application. Is that correct? And it's now purely Vertex Developments.
The condition relating to the management plan and securing the management plan has been removed because when we originally looked at the application, we understood that what was being applied for was the present use. However, that's not transpired to be the case. The manner of use that's now proposed is just for a C4 property, and therefore differs from the present use of the property. As we've said, we believe the existing present use would be sui generis, which indicates that there would be considerations there that is materially different than a C4 use or a C3 use, which warranted that management plan, but we no longer believe that to be the case.
Thank you. And just on that point then, one of the speakers, Mr. Manning, raised an interesting point about HMO, our knowledge of HMOs. So, am I right in understanding that before this application came forward, we didn't actually know that this property was being used in an HMO sort of format? And if that's the case, how do we know that we're not exceeding the maximum permissible number of HMOs within that radius if there are properties being used as HMOs but that we're not aware of?
Okay, Chief Planning Officer.
In response to that, so we can't know what we don't know, so there may well be things happening in the district that we are not aware of. We do have a way of recording licensed HMOs, and certainly through the planning system we are permitting, and there are records when we do HMOs. So we have got obviously a good amount of knowledge over what HMOs are operating within our district, but if there are things happening that we don't know about, we clearly can't be taking those into account. When things are brought to our attention, we do look into those in more detail, and that's something that's the extent of what anybody could do, really.
So are we saying that the current use was not legal then? Is that what we're saying? Well, because it had a licence, didn't it, to do what it was doing. The Julian House has a licence, but it wasn't, the property wasn't registered as an HMO.
I'm happy to answer, Sarah. So, in terms of our understanding and records for the property, the GIS mapping that the planning services use does show properties that benefit from a HMO licence. So on that mapping software, the property is recorded as having a HMO licence. If we were to hypothetically look at another application for a property down the road, we would see that this property has a HMO licence and be able to take that into consideration in the in that density test. In terms of this specific application, it's obviously not a straightforward case, and there has been some confusion about whether planning permission's required and what the exact planning status of the building is. So licensing and planning are obviously two different separate regimes, unless kind of a breach of planning is brought to our attention. It is possible to have instances where a property has a HMO license but doesn't require planning permission.
Right, and I think it's important just to emphasise that we are only here to consider the planning application that's in front of us. We're not looking into the enforcement case if one was opened on what is currently happening. Councillor Gurley.
A bit of clarification, I guess, because if Mr. Mannings has said it has an HMO licence through the environmental, why are we applying for one now? Okay, thank you.
Right, it appears you've got had an answer from Councillor Halsall, but we didn't hear what you said. So could you?
No, the officers obviously agree. HMO licensing is different legislation to planning, so they're mutually separate. We're talking about planning application, aren't we, at the moment? Perhaps environmental health shouldn't have given the licence for HMO until planning permission had been secured, but as Chris has suggested, they probably didn't know if you needed planning permission in the first place.
Anybody want to add to that clarification? Okay, thank you. Right, any more questions? Councillor Hodge.
Yes, I've just got a simple one just to remind myself. So C4 means 5 bedrooms maximum, 3 to 6 people maximum, just to check I understand that.
Yeah, it's up to a maximum of 6 occupants. The number of bedrooms isn't directly relevant.
Councillor Jackson.
I am somewhat spatially challenged, but it seemed to me that of the bedrooms on the first floor, there was a very considerable disparity in the sizes, and I did wonder if bedroom 3 met the actual standard that's required. It was 6 something, whereas the adjacent rooms were 9 something and 11 something. I wonder if the officer could explain if that room is big enough to be a studio bedroom or whatever.
So on the submitted floor plan, which is on the screen, it shows that the floor space of that bedroom 3, which obviously is considerably smaller than those adjacent to it, is 6.8 square metres. That is above the minimum standard set out in the HMO SPD.
Thank you. Right, just a question from me, really, to do with the conditions. Am I right, you're just proposing two conditions? One is about ensuring that the property is made secure, which is, one would imagine, would be desirable for any property. And the other one was to ensure that the energy performance of the dwelling it improved and got a higher rating than it currently has. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So in addition to the two standard conditions, which are the time limit and the plans list, there's two other conditions proposed. One's for the EPC certificate. So policy H2 of the placemaking plan partial update requires that HMOs meet EPC rating of at least C. So in this instance, information has been submitted to demonstrate that that could be achieved, and therefore the conditions being put on to require that to be that EPC certificate to be provided prior to the use commencing. The other condition is a series of measures for the property to be secure by design. So it's enhancing the security of that property for future occupiers, which is obviously a benefit for providing a good standard of accommodation.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions? Councillor Jackson, then Councillor Hughes.
Things sort of hadn't occurred to me to ask earlier, because there seems to be more garden space than I had recalled, and I was wondering if an appropriate condition would not have been some sort of maintenance arrangement, because overgrown gardens are a considerable problem for neighbours, not least as well as the tenants, if nobody has any means of maintaining it. So would it be appropriate to put in a condition about maintaining the grounds around the building?
I don't think that such a condition would meet the 6 tests. So all of the properties in this area have similarly sized gardens. There's no conditions mandating that occupiers of other properties keep their gardens in a tidy manner. I don't think it would be reasonable to attach that for this property. I don't think it would relate to the planning merits of why this development is acceptable.
Did you have a second question, or is that...
No, I'm just thinking that it is an end spot, and
yes.
It is quite large, so I would have thought we might have considered that.
Yeah. Okay, Councillor Hughes.
Thank you. I'm just wondering how we're now expected to interpret the police report. Is that still part of this application? And it seems to form 2 parts. The first part is making the building secure for the residents of the building, which is mainly common sense, really, but that's quite sensible to make the building secure. The second part of it refers to a high level of crime and antisocial behaviour within a certain radius of the property. So in terms of this application, I'm just wondering how are we supposed to interpret this police report? What bearing should we apply?
The Chief Planning Officer is going to respond.
Fear of crime can be a material planning consideration, but the purpose of the planning system is to regulate the use of land and buildings, and so some sort of condition that makes a property more secure fits within that regime very well. But in terms of the police report, which talks about crime and difficulties in the area more generally, that's not the remit of the planning system to control, and it's not within the ability of the planning system to control that. So that is dealt with through different legislation and different powers. I don't know if the case officer wants to add anything to that.
I was only going to say that the police report is obviously a material consideration. It is fact, but I don't believe that has any, in terms of the crime statistics for the wider area, it doesn't have any bearing on whether the C4 use would be acceptable there's no reason to believe or assume that a C4 use would generate a higher level of crime. I think it reflects the appropriate need for the property to be secured by design, but I don't think it indicates anything else.
And I think it's accurate to say that although the police identified numbers of offences that had taken place in that area, there was no evidence actually linking that to the specific property. Now that may be, that may be, anecdotally sort of in the area, something that people say, but in terms of the evidence in front of us, we don't have that evidence linking crime to this particular property. And as you say, we're talking about the future use and not the current use. Thank you. Does anybody else want to ask a question? Right, we move to, thank you very much, the case officer. We move to the debate. Who would like to start us off? Councillor Halsall.
Thanks, Chair. So we've got the current use, which is unauthorised, which is we've established is sui generis, and we've heard from the neighbour that that current use is seemingly going to be coming to an end. The application did generate a lot of anxiety amongst local residents, hence the number of objections received, hence the response from Avon and Somerset Police. But if we were to grant this application from C3, which is the permitted use, which is a dwelling, although it's not being used for that at the moment, to a C4, then this issue about, the fact we have 5 formerly homeless people living in this property is going to go away. If we refuse it, they can either then put in a planning application for the sui generis use, and we'll consider that on its merits, or we can take enforcement action. So we're essentially looking at a change of use from C3 to C4 in accordance with the local plan policy, in respect of changing it to a housing multiple occupation, it doesn't really matter who lives in the property. It could be students, it could be professionals who are sharing the property together, because there's more than 3 of them. So we need to consider what are the implications of that. Now, Councillor Sahanai mentioned parking. We haven't had any objections from the Highways Department. Yes, feasibly there could be 5 additional vehicles associated with an HMO, but perhaps there is capacity within the local area to accommodate that additional number of vehicles. There is no knowingly any over-concentration of HMOs, whether permitted or unauthorised, and if any unauthorised HMOs do come to our attention, we can obviously take the necessary action for that. So it's not contributing to a cluster of HMOs in the area. It's an end property, and that property next door is not an existing HMO, so it's ticking all the boxes in terms of policy. So I'll just start on that point.
Right, the Chief Planning Officer would like to make a contribution.
Thank you. I just really want to be absolutely clear that we've heard today that the current management of that building may be ceasing their management of it, and it may change, and it may no longer continue to operate in the way that it is currently. However, that is not a matter that we are seeking to control today or determine today. That is something that we shouldn't be giving any weight to, because we do not know if that is going to be the case or is not going to be the case. So what I would urge members to do is to focus on the application before them today, which is a change of use from a C3 to a C4, and after that decision is made, we can consider whether the operations that are taking place within that building fit within the permissions that are granted, and whether there are any further actions that we need to take. However, I wouldn't wish any weight to be given to matters that are outside of the control of this committee today. Thank you.
Councillor Simon.
Thank you. I mean, I agree with Councillor Halsall about the proposed use. It ticks all the boxes. I'm still slightly unclear why officers now think it's sui generis, having allocated it to Class C3C. C3C was introduced because of the need to house people with needs in the community. It's part of the care and community policy. Going back many years, I remember there were debates about that. And if it's assessed as being suitable for care in the community because it's permitted development from single-family development, which was the original C3A use, then it seems to me that C3C to C4 shows that this isn't an impermissible move. So I'm happy to support Councillor Halsall in concluding that this is an approvable development.
Right. For the comment, Councillor Jackson.
Well, I mean, I can appreciate the residents' disquiet and the potential lack of amenity which they may envisage. And I've been asking myself, what would the response be if, in fact, as with the case of an HMO in my own road, there were 4 nurses in there? I mean, we, clap the NHS, but sometimes we're not very practical in supporting our medical staff. So I think we've got to exclude the question of who the occupants might be or who they currently are, and just look at it in more physical terms, and I cannot see any good reason whatsoever for not supporting the officer's recommendation. So I'm therefore going to propose that we accept the officer's recommendation on our purely policy lines. It doesn't donut anything, it's not in an area of high density of HMOs, and although I appreciate we want affordable houses for hard-working families and all that stuff, we've got to think also about single people for whom this, professional people for whom this might be very appropriate accommodation. It's up to them to judge, that's a market matter.
Thank you very much. So that's a motion proposed by Councillor Jackson to support the officer recommendation to permit. Do we have a seconder? Okay, Councillor Hodge.
I'm happy to second the recommendation. I think this is policy compliant and for the reasons set out by the officer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have a motion to support the officer recommendation to permit from Councillor Jackson, seconded by Councillor Hodge. Anybody want to speak on that before we take a vote? Councillor Hughes.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, I'm hugely sympathetic to the residents here. I mean, the issues they're facing are huge. I appreciate that what we're looking at here is very narrow in terms of that, and we're restricted. It is policy compliant, so we don't have. I don't think developments like this offer anything to enhance the local community. But I don't think we have any option other than to accept the application, sadly.
Anybody else want to comment? Right, well, oh yes, Councillor Warren.
Yeah, very quickly, Chair. I know we shouldn't take it into consideration, but I just do wonder whether, if this was at present a bog standard house with a bog standard family living in it, if this then came to this committee to be turned into an HMO, whether we'd be looking at it slightly differently. And I don't think we should, because what is being done is being done, I don't know if illegally is probably too strong a word, it probably is, but against policy. And I'm not convinced that's not just shifting our way of thinking. So I think that I cannot support the officer's recommendation.
The only thing I would say to that is that I think we would apply the same policies in the scenario that you have outlined. There wouldn't be any difference. The policies would apply every time. And this does appears to tick all the policy boxes. Anybody want to comment on that?
I just want to confirm that as being absolutely correct. And what you have here is a C3 property with an application to change it to a C4. And so the occupiers aren't the critical factor here, it's the use classes that you're considering.
Okay, right, we've got a proposal, it's been seconded, and are going to go to a vote now. So all those in favour of accepting the officer's recommendation to permit, please show. Any against? Any abstentions? Okay, that's carried. Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you to members of the public for attending. That's carried. We have a little bit more business, but if you want to slip away now, you're very welcome. Right, we move on to the appeals report. Does anybody have any questions or comments on the appeals report? We're just asked to note the report. Councillor Jackson.
Our quarterly report, not the performance. You're looking at the appeals.
I was just looking at the appeals to start with. Anybody want to comment on the appeals report? No, that's fine. We'll go on to the quarterly performance report. So, Councillor Jackson, this is your opportunity.
Well, no, I'm just a bit concerned about there appears at times to be a bit of a hiccup, and I don't know if that relates to our staffing levels, and I am concerned that we perhaps don't have enough enforcement officers on the block, as it were, and that may be causing issues. I can never somehow identify specific cases with the actual numbers that appear in the stats. But one comment I would like to make is an unauthorised building appeared in my ward. I didn't even notice it because it was tucked behind a terrace of housing, and it's been demolished. So I think this is a very good example of where one of our enforcement officers moved in, tried to negotiate, and the chap agreed and took the building down. So marks on both sides.
Thank you. Just to clarify, you spoke of a hiccup, but you didn't describe or identify what the hiccup was that you've noticed. So can you clarify?
See, it may not be anything to do with our staffing. We somehow have dips in numbers of the applications coming in. And the speed with which they're dealt with. And I often wonder why. I think you know my younger son is in planning. They've got a problem because of the economic recession in that area, and they're just getting fewer applications coming through. So is that happening here, or are we stretched to deal with them, or what or not? Or is the new procedure very confusing with Michael Gove's local residents' referendums on the horizon?
I've been told by the senior planners that that we're experiencing in Baines the same as the national trend, which is just as you describe, fewer planning applications in total, and the proportion of major applications reduced as part of that total. Is that fair to say?
Yes, there's a national reduction in numbers, and Baines Planning Department follows that general trend. Nonetheless, the officers at the moment are carrying very high caseloads. So if we sort of look at it in the broad sense, officers still have high numbers of caseloads. However, the performance across the board is certainly higher than many of the districts local to us, and nationally we perform very well in terms of comparative figures in terms of our determinations of those applications. So in terms of staffing levels, well, staffing is always obviously difficult in many aspects of many parts of the council, and the planning department is no different. However, we are well staffed. We've recently been able to recruit further staff into the department, and we are always able to secure good quality staff and perform in relative terms really well as a department. So that's just really the general position.
Councillor Hodge.
Yeah, I've just got another inquiry about enforcement as we seem to have time today. So I think we noted last time that the investigations closed in the last quarter were 227 from a level of 400, which seemed positive news, but obviously there's a lot more investigations launched and we're back at 430. And I'd be interested to understand, I don't know whether we can have a presentation at some time, because these high numbers of investigations, but enforcement notices are 2, contravention notices about 4, and breach of condition notices. I mean, I don't understand the differences between them all, but it seems like the things that action is taken on is quite small. So I wouldn't mind understanding that really, and has it been different in the past, or what happens to all those 400 cases that don't follow a course of action?
Thank you. And an issue that I've raised 3 or 4 times over recent years about the number, the line investigations closed, because investigations can be closed simply because the council doesn't want to spend the resources or can't spend the resources on pursuing it. It's not in the public interest. But it's not clear which investigations have been closed that would be to the satisfaction of the local community and which have been closed for council convenience. And I've asked for that. Now, I certainly don't want to be adding to the workload of the enforcement team by asking them to go back historically to analyse. But going forward, I really hope that every enforcement case that there can be categorised so that we get some more meaningful information on that line, because it doesn't tell me what I want to know. Can that be passed on?
It certainly could be passed back. If members would like, I could also ask the enforcement manager possibly to maybe attend a committee and maybe provide some more detail just verbally, rather than have to do lots of investigations. That might be a more expedient sort of way to do it, and also to enable you to ask some questions directly of the enforcement manager. He does an excellent job. He's got an excellent team. They have an enormous amount of investigations that come into the department, and they do have a huge amount to do. But explain, it is a technical matter, the different types of things that they do, and so it might be a good idea for him possibly to come to the committee and just maybe speak to you directly, if that's something you would like. Yes, and just before I go to Councillor Simon, just to say that the new Chief Enforcement Officer, I can speak very highly of in a very sensitive case, difficult case in Salford. He's been very, very proactive. And also, there's a new bulletin that's being produced by the enforcement team, giving some information about how they're working, which again is to be applauded. So, Councillor Simon.
Yes, I attended a very good presentation by the enforcement team in the summer over in Keynsham, and gave a good feel for what they do. I agree that a bit more about why investigations are closed, because one of the routes out of an investigation is to have a planning application. So if it seems to me it needs to be closed, not because it's not in the public interest to pursue, closed because an application has been received and determined. There are various options, but it shouldn't be difficult to increase the number that you score just to show that they're achieving positive outcomes, as well as, that's closed because it's not a problem. And it's not surprising there are relatively few that are taken to full enforcement, because you have to know that once you relight your big guns, you're willing to stand behind them throughout the process.
Thank you. Any more comments on the performance report? Councillor Gurley.
Thank you for this. I attended the same presentation back in the summer, and it was very enlightening. I suppose one of my questions is how long some of these things take, because there is one particular case I'm thinking of which seems to have dragged on and dragged on and dragged on in my ward, and we talked about it at the time last summer. We're now 6 months on, and I'd like to know what's happening to that particular case. So whether there's any way of having some graph which illustrates how long things take, I think, would that be helpful to us as well?
That's a good point. Certainly, if we have this meeting of the committee with the head of planning and enforcement, perhaps that's something that you could ask at the time directly to him. Do you want to come in on that?
I was just going to say as well, there is a case officer for every enforcement case, as there is with planning applications, and they will update you. If you would like to contact them, please do, because they're very keen to make sure that you're fully informed, particularly when it involves your own areas and you need to know. So please get in contact with them directly.
Okay, Councillor Jackson.
Is that if you make residents say, oh, we're horrified about X, and you notify the planning department about this, can this be investigated, we don't like whatever it is for whatever reason, and then you get a number come back of the case, but there's no way of identifying whether that number relates to what the complaint you've just passed on, or whether it relates to something else. If it's possible we could have a bit clearer titling, this would help. And secondly, I've got some very old ones in the box, as it were, which Richard Stott was dealing with. And I have never heard what the conclusion was, whether his successor picked up these cases or not, or what. And looking at the table on page 39, you see this unauthorised building that was demolished in Westfield. I can't quite see where it would fit into this table. It came down about 2 months ago, so this is why I'm a bit puzzled.
And of course, an enforcement notice applies to the property, not the particular individuals. And it can happen that the property is sold and you have new owners who actually then put right what was wrong. So there's, I think we've identified already about 4 different reasons why a case might end up closed. Right, thank you for all of that. The date of next meeting is Wednesday the 14th of February, Valentine's Day. And at the moment I'm not aware of any site visits, but if any were taking place, they'd be on the Monday the 5th of February. So I formally close the meeting, and thank you very much for attending today.
Thank you, Chair.